Hello, everyone, and welcome to Agulhas Current Affairs, a marine science podcast here in South Africa. With me as one of your hosts, Dr. Yanis Kissen of Geekoscopy, and
And me, Dr. Nelson Miranda of Argonaut Science.
we are,
Agulhas!
yes, interesting.
Agulhas! We're talking about it now. We're talking about it.
Yeah. So we, of course, have named our podcast after the Agulhas Current because it's so prominent in how it affects marine ecosystems here in South Africa and pretty much all over the world.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, like all the world's like oceans are like interconnected in some way. Like there's only boundaries because we put them there either for simplicity's sake or for political reasons. So what can you tell us, Nelson, about the interconnectivity of the ocean?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's the first principle in ocean literacy. It's that there's only one ocean, actually. And we, of course, we call the different seas, and we even call, sometimes we even say there are two oceans, which is very confusing. Two oceans in South Africa. But actually, in reality, that's something that we as people, I think we as human beings, we at some stage through history, we decided, no, let's call that warmer parcel of water and big current one thing, and let's call that other big area another thing. It's there's no offense, by the way. There's not a physical boundary that someone
No one
put
built
up.
a wall there.
It's imaginary. It's an imaginary boundary, but it is on the charts in terms of geography. It is delineated. Someone's actually made a geography point. GPS global positioning point, and decided no, this is where it ends. But we're talking about a big fluid system. It's fluid, it moves around, it sloshes around. It's not, the water on the surface of our planet it's never really stopping. No. It's always moving around.
Yeah.
And that's really why we have the kind of planet that we have right now.
For sure, it's constantly moving all around the world. We call that the ocean conveyor, and it's driven by just changes in how essentially like changes in pressure and temperature, because water is going to be colder near the polar ice caps, and it's going to be warmer near the tropics, and because of that there's a flow of water from one direction, and it kind of circles around the globe in something we call the ocean conveyor. So it's definitely not just a static solid thing. It's constantly moving, but they are
and it's solar powered, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's so interesting. It's solar powered. And of course the ocean is salty, so the salt that dissolves in the water also plays with the density of the water, because the cold salty water sinks, and that kind of is one of the drivers. And then of course the whole planet is spinning, so that also has a role to play. But the point is that the surface water and the deep water, they sort of travel, and eventually they disperse all the good stuff. In our case, the good stuff is the good temperature of the sun, in such a way that the climate is predictable and and hospitable for human beings. Indeed. And other life.
Indeed. And you could have water that originated somewhere around like Mozambique, ending up here where we are, here where I am in Durban, and then maybe where you are in Cape Town, and then maybe all the way up to Europe in the northern hemisphere.
So that's so interesting. The water can actually come all the way, say, from the Red Sea or somewhere in Southeast Asia, around India itself, the country, and then it can actually come all the way and be squeezed between, because Madagascar is sitting there, so it's kind of squeezed through there. And see, that big flow of water, that's what we call that massive current, right? That's what we call the Agulhas current. And for sure it's going to spread with all the temperature and the properties of the water as
Yeah,
well.
for sure, definitely. So we're chatting about the Goalless Current in particular today because the one closest to us, and probably one of the most important, the largest and the fastest currents on the planet, which makes it a very large driver of the ocean conveyor and just general climate in this area and around the world.
And in Europe, yeah, because they say that as it comes around the end of the tip of South Africa, and it's very fluid, so it's not like you can be sitting at the tip of South Africa looking out and see, oh, there,
Yeah.
Indian Ocean to one side and Atlantic Ocean to the other side. Not really, because it's changing all the time and it's actually bending into itself, and then it's splitting off little rings of heat. And those little rings of heat travel very far. They travel so far, those parcels of hot water, that we suspect that Europe would be in an ice age now if it wasn't for that, right?
If it wasn't for
and even that's right, and even the Gulf Stream, which is considered the fastest, they said whenever you look at textbooks and things like that, they say, Gulf Stream, that's the fastest. Well, the Agulhas is actually pretty fast too, buddy, and the water goes all the way there. It actually provides, water for the Gulf Stream, so that's quite cool.
Yeah, so it has very far-reaching influences, the Agulhas, which is why we think it is really cool. And because of that, like you said, there's this now hot packages of water that kind of split off and go off to the north and goes back into the Indian Ocean. And water just also generally goes in a circle around the continents. And those border continents, those boundaries are what these large marine currents are in the Goalless, is the western boundary of the Indian Ocean that's coming in a southward direction, and they kind of then go up north on the eastern boundary because of the Coriolis effect and how that affects water flow. But we won't get into that now. We probably have a whole episode about the Coriolis effect.
We need a dedicated episode for that. There's a lot of concepts to cover.
Yeah, for sure, definitely. But that's because of its far-reaching consequences and the difference in temperature and density. It has a significant amount of effect on any local region's climate that's around there.
Oh, yeah.
And it causes quite a bit of, actually, from the east and the west of South Africa, it creates such differences in climate and also gives us a bimodal rainfall. Because on the one side it's very rainy during one part of the year, and the other side it's rainy at a different part, which makes it very interesting. And like you said earlier, Nelson, it creates this very different regional aspects of different biomes and different types of plants and animals because of the differences of the climate in each area.
Yeah, and it's no coincidence then that in South Africa we have the most concentrated numbers of different biomes, which are these large areas with unique animals and plants and properties. You're starting to see it's actually no coincidence. It's all linked somehow to the ocean and to the Agulhas Current in particular.
Yeah, and also we tend to think of an ecosystem as just a little area where there's a lot of things. It might be an estuary or a beach, but because when you have something like a Goalless Current that is such a large thing that's moving such a large distance, there are also organisms that part of their life cycle occurs all the way along the current. And in more particular sort of examples for that are fish and also invertebrates that will spawn north in the Goalless Current, maybe near Mozambique or northern KwaZulu-Natal, and their eggs and their larvae will travel in the current or next to the current near the shore all the way down very rapidly to some other ecosystems, maybe in the tropics, in the Eastern Cape, or even Cape Town, and sometimes even all the way to the western coast, which is kind of really weird when you think about how different the water is there. Because on the west coast we have the Benguela Current that's really cold, but you do find some species that are spawning that end up there because of their retroflexion rings we were talking about.
Yeah.
So we call this type of effect like a large marine ecosystem because it's not isolated spots. The Agulhas Current is creating this effect where animals can exist all along the continuum, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I think it has something to do with, we've been observing a poleward shift in the distribution of many animals and even plants, so even mangroves, for example, they seem to be shifting poleward. And of course, mangroves, they are propagated by propagules, little things that float. So maybe, these currents have a role to play there. And we're finding more tropical species now suddenly appearing around the Cape. And we're like, whoa, well, what are you doing
What's
here?
going
You seem
on?
to be a little bit lost, buddy. But it makes sense if you think that they are inside these massive, parcels of moving water.
Yeah, for sure. And it's some of these species have evolved to be very like opportunistic. So they are releasing a lot of their young like high up, and chances are, because like the Agulhas is such a large stream of water, and also sometimes like reflects into the ocean, and you don't want that if you're like a plant because there's no land there for you to go into, or if you're a fish because there's no like estuary to recruit into if you're that kind of species. So what tends to happen is that there's a lot of them that are released in the hopes that at least some of them survive. So when you're talking about like fish and plant propagules that come through, they are going to choose the spots where it's best for them to like survive. But if that spot is changing because like your environment is changing, then the best spot is going to be moving. They evolved to choose the best spot. It doesn't mean that they like looking at an address and going like, I need to go there. Yeah. They're going
with the flow.
Exactly.
They're going with the flow, man.
Yeah.
You just go with the flow. And then hopefully you'll end up maybe in a little sheltered location. That's why our estuaries along our coast harbor a lot of like these visitors, you know. Not just visitors that come with the current, but also obviously visitors that come through other means, maybe shipping as well. But the point is, it's a harbor. It's a safe harbor for these creatures, and that's why you've been finding them.
Yeah, and if they feel comfortable, they're just going to set up shop. It kind of reminds me of like the Finding Nemo movie, and they were looking for this one address, like P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. But that's not how fish work. They're just gonna set up shop wherever it feels right to.
I think there is obviously they're not thinking like that to themselves, but they are smelling, isn't it? They are following some sort of cues, and even the migration cues from even say the whale migrations as well. And even the events, there's amazing events like the sardine run, right? So that's also it has to do with the Goalless current, because in this case we're also talking about following cold parcels of water and nutrients, and fish do they're very good at smelling out these favorable conditions and food, and that's basically how they like following the trend. So everyone's going with the flow. It's definitely there's a big influence on these these currents and these movements.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, talking about fishing, the Agulhas Bank, we have to mention the Agulhas Bank. It's a very productive, very attractive fishing ground, and a solid contribution to the economy as well.
For sure, a lot of our fisheries occur on the Agulhas Bank, and it's really important for our blue economy and feeding people, because food security is a big thing in Africa. The Agulhas Bank, various estuaries around the East Cape are very important for fish to complete their life cycle, because it provides them with like shelter and food, so they don't get like washed away in the larger current. So that area around there that we were talking about, where there's a lot of biomes, it's also in the ocean, and on the coast, and it's just the Eastern Cape just provides like this. And the Western Cape just provides this array of different habitats for different species to inhabit and kind of speciate out into different things. That's why it's so biodiverse.
Yeah, and then interestingly, that's also why we've move to create protected areas in those areas, not just the coastal areas, of which there are now a lot of protected areas, but even the deeper, sort of on the continental shelf and the quite deep areas which we don't know much about, by the way, you know. But there are activities there, and in order to sort of be fair and be sustainable in how we use those areas, we've also set up, South Africa has marine protected areas.
Yeah.
Which and there's new ones. There's a lot of new ones, which is a good step towards trying to manage the activities and the impact of those activities on the environment.
I think it's very important, and this has been internationally recognized and locally, that we have to give back some rights to the environment and animals that live in there. That's why we even have things now that say ecosystems have rights. And when it comes to like estuaries, where I work, now we even giving ecosystems the right to have fresh water, because we tend to steal that for agriculture and industry. So giving back is really important, but because at the outset we just like rocked up here and we were like, we're going to take this and we're going to like name it this because of this reason, and it's going to be ours now. So how did the naming for Agulhas come about? It's quite interesting.
Yeah, isn't that because Agulhas is actually a Portuguese word, right, meaning needles, the sewing needle, for example, the needles, know. And so the story goes apparently that at the tip of Africa, which by the way is not Table Mountain National Park, because a lot of people think it's in False Bay and near Cape Town, but it's not. It's actually further south, at the Agulhas National Park, right? And apparently there at that tip, if you hold a compass, the needle of the compass points north very clearly in line with the tip, Yeah. So that's the story, apparently. I wasn't there, I don't know.
You weren't the Portuguese dude that did that.
Yeah. But yeah, there is that. And apparently, yeah. And I mean, Agulhas is an interesting name, and it's a name also of something else that has to do with research. The research vessels SA Agulhas 1 and 2. And we actually thought it would be fun to now and again do a little segment where we ask ourselves, where is the SA Agulhas right now?
Indeed, yeah,
because
for sure.
It might be, it's a very interesting vessel. It could be in the Southern Ocean, it could be breaking ice out there and going into amazing adventures. It takes a lot of young people. There's opportunities for young people to actually join the crew and be part of scientific experiments. It's helping our global understanding of how the ocean works, and trying to understand how climate is changing, because climate has an impact. Climate change is connected with the Agulhas Current, and the Agulhas Current is changing as climate changes as well, as global climate changes.
Yeah, for sure.
And trying to understand how that works is very important. So let's see, where shall we say? Where is the SA Agulhas?
While you're looking, I'll make a comparison. If you're a fan of Star Trek, they have the what is it called? The Discovery, right? The Star Trek Starship. Is it called the Discovery? Jeez, I just lost my Star Trek knowledge right there. But essentially, that's our search and discovery vessel for in South Africa. So if we have Star Trek in the future, our ship would probably be named the Agulhas, and it'll be out in space.
The Agulhas.
It'll be out in space looking for different things. It'll be our...
The name was so important that our second major research vessel for South Africa was also called Agulhas. All right, so here we go. SA Agulhas. Where is it right now? And it's in the harbor of Cape Town. Oh, that's a bit boring. It's just, on standby. Just docked out there.
You should have been in the field reporting directly from there, because
I was actually there the other day, funny enough, and I because I was on a vessel next to it, And I saw it. So
confirmed.
Sure,
definitely.
Visually and according to the systems.
Yeah. It's actually Enterprise. I just remembered now. So Discovery. Star Trek Discovery is the series. So they have the USS Enterprise, and we have the, I think it's SAS Agulhas, right?
Or SA Agulhas? Do they do SAS?
I believe so. I don't know. I'm not not a military
It's a really
man.
interesting vessel. So maybe we can look into it in future podcasts, and also we can talk about other things like social, economic happenings along the coast.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll try and keep an eye on the Agulhas as it's going around. But I think that's enough for the Agulhas today. Otherwise, we could just go on for hours talking about the Agulhas Current. But yeah, we'll talk about new stuff in the future. But until then, where can we find your stuff, Nelson, on the internet?
You just need only to ask the all-wise Google for Argonaut science.
Master Google.
The Oracle, right? Master Google. So it's Argonaut science. It's the little... Actually, there's been a lot of Argonauts appearing now in Cape Town, which people have been fascinated about. They're washing up a bit. Right. And only the female produces that amazing, very delicate shell, which is why it's called sometimes the paper nautilus. And so it's Argonaut Science, and you can find us on the social medias as well, on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure.
And also, of course, the great
Geekoscopy, which I don't have any interesting science thing to tell you about like you had, Nelson. But you can find me at geekoscopy.com. And on all the social medias at Geekoscopy. But thanks for joining me, Nelson. It was a fun chat. And we will see everyone else on the next episode. Cheers.
Cheers.